There is no record of his laughter. In the stone-bound annals of the Abbey of Visna, a forgotten priory sunken in moss and winter, a single passage notes his birth without celebration. On the eve of St. Morwen, under a veil of hail and black moon, a son was born to Queen Chelina. The sky did not open. No bells were rung. His name was Tomas. His father, King Roman II, died from a putrid wound 3 days prior. The blade that struck him in the flank bore no crest. Some whispered the wound had been begged for in prayer. Others said it was the queen who prayed. But the boy arrived before his father's body had cooled. Swaddled not in joy, but in a kingdom's unrest. And so he became king, 3 pounds of flesh and breathless whimpers, crowned by fear rather than faith. The hall where his coronation took place was thick with silence, broken only by the shriek of iron hinges and the dull echo of boots on cold flagstone. The old archbishop, hands quivering from age or dread, anointed his brow with oil. No hand clapped. No harp played. The candlelight trembled on the stony cheeks of assembled lords who dared not smile. They say the baby cried once, and then did not cry again for weeks. They say the nurse who first held him was later found in the well. Her fingers had been bitten. This child, with cheeks like porcelain and hair the shade of rotted straw, grew not among toys but knives. The palace of Gradle, his ancestral home, became a place of shadows and rituals. At dusk, incense would coil through the corridors, lavender, ash, and burnt rosemary. It was said to calm the humors. But it did not calm the boy. He grew in stillness. Servants learned to speak in whispers. The boy king did not like noise. When Tomas turned 3, the head steward was beheaded for bringing the wrong broth. The reason was not spoken aloud, but all understood. The boy had turned his face away. At 5, he demanded his mother be silent in his presence. The queen obeyed. Some say she whispered prayers at night behind her hands, others say her tongue was taken. There is a peculiar quality to power when it nests in one who does not know play. To rule before one has been ruled is to shape the world with unformed hands. There is no mercy in such touch. Only instinct. And fear. But let us pause here, not to excuse, but to understand. For what is a child without a lullaby? What is a soul formed in echoing chambers, where no one dares to sing? A chronicler of the court, known only as Brother Yarrick, wrote in his margins. He watches people like one who cannot feel warmth, only the heat of flame. His eyes are so pale they do not catch candlelight. And later, I think the boy is waiting for something, but I do not know what. Perhaps he expects someone to come take him away. Or perhaps he is the one who must come. In the garden, which had long since turned to thistle and vine, a single swing remained, untouched. Once, a maid tried to push him on it. Once. Her scream was heard down the east wing. The next day, the swing was dusted with crimson petals. The years did not touch him like they do others. Tomas aged, but slowly. At 10, his voice had not broken, nor had his gaze softened. He listened often to the court magician, a man who once lived among stars and came down for coin. The magician, old and bitter, said the boy asked him once, "Is it true, what you told the others? That time is a circle? It is one shape of it. Then why does it hurt like a line? To grow alone is to rot while breathing." This is not a metaphor, it is anatomy. The mind, without tenderness, calcifies. It forgets softness. It hardens not with age, but with echo. And yet, even then, there were glimpses, quiet as moths. In the winter of his 12th year, a sparrow broke its wing against the glass. Tomas watched it twitch in the snow for a long while, face unreadable. When the steward reached to crush it, the boy stopped him with a look. "Let it die in silence," he said. Like everything else. It was not called a court. Not aloud. In official records, the circle that governed beside the boy was simply the advisory board. But within the corridors of Gradle, behind half-closed shutters and beneath priestly robes, they were known only as the Whispering Teeth. Because they never spoke above a hush. Because they smiled too often. Because they bit from within. There were 6. Lord Miro of Vask, who once skinned a heretic alive in the square for a crowd of children. Dowager Eilena, the boy's great-aunt, who wore perfume to mask the scent of grave soil from her hands. Bishop Adon, who kept his fingers folded like a spider in prayer. Sir Edvin, the silent huntsman, who never removed his gloves. Magister Corwell, who drank ink and wrote prophecies that never came true. And the voice, his name forgotten, his face always veiled, his presence constant behind the throne. They did not advise. They observed. Like vultures watching a young lion tear into meat, unsure whether to praise it or flee. At 13, Tomasz sentenced the noble's daughter to wear a mask of iron for smiling at him. At 14, he exiled the whole town for singing during a thunderstorm. At 15, he declared that no one born on his birthday was allowed to speak above a whisper, ever again. Each decree was passed without tremor, without fury. He did not shout. He did not blink. Only once did he explain. "Too much noise and the past begins to hear you," he said. What was he afraid of? Not death. No one raised in the marrow of state fears what others flee. Not pain. The boy had seen too many flayed backs, too many broken fingers on his mother's rosary. No. It was not fear, but something deeper. He feared the collapse of control. The rustle of chaos. The moment when someone else's will entered the room like a draft, and moved a curtain he had not chosen to stir. That is why he walked barefoot, so he could hear each step. Why he banned dogs, birds, wind chimes. Why laughter was taxed. Silence, to Tomasz, was not absence. It was architecture. A letter survives, half burned, but preserved by the monks of Tvara, found wedged in the wall of a servant's quarters. It reads, "His silence is not stillness. It listens back. I served him stew, and he looked at me as if he could see what I had dreamed. I fear we do not serve a boy, but a mirror that remembers." The castle at night was a strange place. The walls sweated salt. The torches flickered against tapestries of old wars, their colors fading like old bruises. Servants moved like ghosts, barefoot, belts drawn tight to prevent the rustle of linen. In the center of it all, the child king sat awake long after moonrise, staring at a map of his kingdom, one hand tracing roads he had never walked. Roads that others died to build. Sometimes he would ask, "Do they dream of me?" The magician once dared to answer, "Some do. And when they wake?" Some remember your name. Others remember their chains. It is worth pausing here to consider the paradox of power placed in the hands of the voiceless. For Tomasz had never truly spoken his will. His laws were copied from glances, his commands deduced from patterns. He ruled not with words, but with expectations. The court, then, became a theater of decipherment. Every twitch of his mouth was studied. Every pause was interpreted as edict. In this way, the boy did not rule, but was ruled by the fear of his imagined wrath. Thus the whispering teeth thrived. They wrote his story before he lived it. And he, locked in the shell of their silence, mistook it for his own. One winter, a child from the provinces, 7 years of age, mouse-stained with mulberries, was brought before Tomasz for the crime of singing. The boy king did not strike him. Did not speak. He walked slowly to the child and knelt before him, their eyes level. The court held its breath. The fire crackled. Somewhere, a shutter creaked. Then Tomasz reached out and touched the child's throat, softly. "Keep your voice," he said. "But do not waste it on the sky. It cannot hear you." The child was sent away, mouth closed forever. He grew into a man who wrote poems in the dirt, using only his heel. Later, when the voice asked why he spared the boy, Tomasz simply said, "Because he reminded me that I was not born speaking either." He had never known the feeling of absence. Not in the way peasants feel hunger gnawing at their sides like rats beneath the ribs. Not in the way a mother feels the absence of a child in a crib too quiet. The young King Tomasz was given bread before he could ask. Cloak before the cold could touch him. He did not grow hungry, because there was always a hand, a command, a glance cast ahead of need. But to be untouched by hunger is not to be blessed. It is to be blind to the breathe between wanting and receiving, to the ache that gives shape to joy, to the trembling of the soul that teaches mercy. And so, he was never taught to wait. In the east wing of Grado Castle, there was a room that no one entered. Its windows were sealed with pitch. Its air was thick with the scent of wax and iron. In the center sat a wooden chair, small, rough, unpainted. On it, each night, the boy sat alone for an hour, by his own command. It was the only hour where no one could serve him, no one could speak. The court dared not ask why. Only the magician once dared. "What do you think of majesty in the dark?" Tomas did not answer for a long time. Then, simply, "I try to miss something." In that silence, perhaps, he learned to name shapes he could not touch. But the lesson did not last. For the boy was told he was the kingdom. He was taught that to desire was to weaken, to wait was to kneel. And so he lived not by seasons, but by command. Not by appetite, but arrangement. Food was not eaten for taste, it was weighed for balance. Even his dreams were curated. The court astrologer prescribed them, smells, scenes, colors placed on his pillow like herbs. And what is a man without a single unscripted craving? A statue that believes it breathes. Once, in his 16th year, during a visit to the lowlands, Tomas saw a child running barefoot through mud, laughing. The boy was thin, wild-eyed, with a crust of bread in hand. He stumbled, fell, and laughed harder. The king said nothing. But that night, he did not sleep. The next morning, he ordered all village children to wear shoes at all times. No reason was given. But the whisper spread. He saw joy without chains, and it frightened him. A court diary, penned in secrecy by an attendant named Mirel, offers this quiet passage. "He asked me once if meat had a sound when it cooked. I told him yes. He asked what it sounded like. I said, like snow melting on a roof. He smiled, faintly, and said, then I've never heard it." The boy's detachment from hunger extended beyond the body. He knew not thirst for knowledge, only the shape of obedience. Books were brought, but only histories approved by the church, theories softened by loyalty. He did not explore them. He consumed them, as one might drink broth without ever knowing the taste. Once, he found a banned manuscript beneath a priest's bed. Its pages spoke of men who wandered alone, who chose to live without kings. He read it 3 times. Then he burned it. But not before copying a single phrase onto the inside of his sleeve. To want nothing is not freedom. It is death in motion. He never spoke of it. But from that day, a strange change crept into his gaze. Not softer, but slower. As if he were weighing something not yet known to him. By 17, the boy was taller than any of his guards, but still pale as linen. He walked not like royalty, but like a sleepwalker avoiding broken glass. His lips rarely moved. His food was tasted first by 2 servants, and then once again by his dog, though he had no love for it. The dog was later found drowned. No one asked why. Some said he had started fasting once a week, in silence, behind the chapel. Others said he had taken to staring at the bread before eating it, for minutes at a time. "He is trying to remember what it means to need," said the magician. Need is a sacred thing. It is the shape of the human wound. To hunger is to be reminded of one's mortality, one's humility, one's smallness beneath the stars. It is what binds king and beggar. The growl of the stomach is a prayer without words. But Tomas, shaped by fear and fattened by command, was never allowed to kneel before need. And so, the world he built was brittle. A mirror that cracked the first time it was touched by wind. There is a note, preserved in wax, unsigned, and buried in the chapel stones. It reads, "I fear I am becoming a god not because I deserve it, but because no one will dare remind me I am not. I have never known the ache of waiting. And so, I fear I will never understand forgiveness." There came a winter that did not end. It arrived without snow, without frost. Just a deep, breathless cold that seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself. Fires did not warm. Wool felt wet even when dry. The walls of Castle Gradle groaned like old trees, and the stone floors no longer remembered heat. Some said it was a punishment. Others said it was the boy's soul, grown so hollow it drew warmth from the air. In truth, it was neither. It was simply a season, like all others, uncaring, unspeaking. But within the heart of a boy who had never opened a window, it became something else. Tomas was 18. He had ruled half a lifetime. He had seen men hang for leaving boots muddy in his hall, and women vanish for weeping too loudly at night. But that winter something shifted. He began to close the curtains. All of them. One by one, in every chamber, until the castle dimmed into a womb of velvet and dust. Even the throne room, once lit by wide stained glass, became a cave of flickering oil light. When asked, he simply said, "The world is too large today. I will wait for it to become small again." The court obeyed. It always did. But fear had begun to sour. Even the whispering teeth now whispered less. The voice was heard coughing behind the throne. The magician, long weary, began burning his scrolls. The huntsman refused to hunt. And in this stilled, darkening court, a new kind of silence grew. Not the silence of control, but of something unraveling. One night, a servant named Rilke, no more than 16 herself, left open a window in the west tower. Just a crack. Enough for the scent of the frost to slide through, and the sound of distant bells from a chapel far below. The king noticed it within minutes. His feet found the draught before his thoughts did. He turned slowly, walked to the sill, and stood there, staring at the dark slit in the wall. He did not scream, did not punish. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, "It smells like someone else's life." Rilke was not punished. She was never seen again. But some say he asked her name before she disappeared. Then, something stranger. He stopped speaking. Not in protest. Not in pain. He simply stopped. For weeks. Then months. His mouth closed like a door, and did not open again. Orders were passed by gestures, by ink, by glances. In time, he even ceased writing. The court learned to interpret breath, posture, stillness. It made their fear grow delicate, religious, almost holy. But the magician, who had once feared him most, began to fear him less. He said to the others, "He is not a god. He is a boy who does not know how to leave his own room." And the room did become a kind of tomb. Tomas began sleeping in the day, pacing at night. He no longer washed. He no longer changed robes. His hands grew dry and papery. One nail cracked and bled, and he wrapped it himself in cloth. The scent of beeswax and sour wine lingered in his chambers like a second skin. And always the curtains remained shut. There is a record in the Royal Physician's Journal. "He asked me what blindness felt like. I told him I could not say. He asked me to sew his eyes shut. I refused. I was dismissed. I was not killed. I think that frightened me more." Tomas was not mad. Madness is noise. Tomas was not noisy. He was becoming still, like a figure under deep water. Something too long submerged. Something no longer blinking. What happens to a child never touched by rain? Never struck by shame? Never told to wait at the door of another's will? He does not grow. He accumulates. And when such a child faces winter without windows, he turns inward. And finds no center. The winter stretched into summer. Then into another autumn that felt colder than spring. Birds did not return to the castle walls. Rats grew bold in the halls. Servants whispered of curses. Of old gods waking beneath the foundations. But no god had done this. Only power. Then one night, they say, he opened a curtain. No one knows why. Some say he heard a melody from the hills. Others say he had a dream of his mother smiling. Or that he simply woke in pain, and followed the only draught he had not sealed. He opened it slowly. With both hands. The moonlight fell across his face like milk. He did not flinch. He did not cry. He only stared at the light, at the emptiness it revealed. Then, he turned back to the room, and said, "It's all dust. Even me." The throne had always been too large for him. Carved from black oak and bound with iron vines, it was made for a man who believed weight was proof of worth. Tomas had grown into it, but never with it. Even now, at 19, when his limbs were long and his shoulders sharp as winter branches, the throne seemed to lean away from him, as if ashamed of what it had carried. He sat upon it rarely. More often, he stood beside it, one hand resting on the armrest like a visitor unsure whether to stay. Those who watched noticed this change and did not speak of it. Silence had long since become their language of survival. The crown, too, had changed. Once polished daily, heavy with gemstones taken from conquered valleys, it now lay untouched on a velvet cushion. Dust softened its edges. Spiders traced their thin, patient lines between rubies. Tomas no longer wore it unless required by ritual, and even then, he removed it as soon as the words were spoken. "It presses down," he wrote once, in a rare note left on the council table. "Not on my head. On time." That year, rebellion stirred at the borders. Men who had lived half their lives under his decrees began to test the silence. Crops were burned. Taxes refused. Songs, actual songs, were heard at night in the hills. The whispering teeth urged swift cruelty. They remembered the old Tomas, the one who ruled by stillness and fear. But the king did not answer. Days passed. Messengers waited. The court began to rot in indecision, like fruit left too long in a bowl. Power, when not used, does not fade gently, it ferments. It was then that Tomas did something no one expected. He descended the throne steps and walked out of the hall. No escort. No announcement. Just the sound of his boots on stone, echoing once, then fading. They found him hours later in the chapel. He sat on the cold floor before the altar, crownless, hands folded, staring at the crucifix. The candles had burned low. Wax had pooled like pale tears at their bases. The air smelled of old incense and damp stone. When the bishop approached, trembling, Tomas spoke, his voice thin and used, but steady. "When he died," he asked, "did the world become quieter?" The bishop did not know how to answer. Faith had always been a performance in Gradle. A structure like silence. Tomas had knelt because he was told to kneel. He had prayed because others watched. But now, alone before a God who had known hunger, thirst, and fear, something shifted. Not belief. Recognition. That night, he dreamed for the first time without guidance. He dreamed of the swing in the overgrown garden. Of the sparrow in the snow. Of the barefoot child laughing in the mud. He dreamed of his own hands, small, trembling, reaching for something unseen. He woke with tears on his face and did not wipe them away. The next morning, he ordered the crown melted down. Not destroyed, changed. The gold was recast into bowls for the poor. The gems were ground into dust and mixed with mortar to repair the city walls. When the whispering teeth protested, he looked at them with an expression they had never seen before. Not anger. Weariness. "You mistook my silence for certainty," he said. "It was only fear that had nowhere to go." 2 of them fled that day. 1 died by his own hand. The voice was never seen again. Freedom is a dangerous thing when it arrives late. Tomas began undoing what he could. Laws softened. Punishments shortened. Windows opened. Laughter returned, not loudly, not yet, but like a cautious animal stepping into light. But time is not clay that can be reshaped without cracks. The people did not know how to trust him. Nor did he know how to forgive himself. Every mercy he granted felt like an admission carved into bone. In a final entry from Brother Yarrick, written with shaking ink, we read, "He walks the halls as if already a ghost. Kinder, yes, but thinner. As though each act of mercy costs him something he cannot replace. The throne remained empty more often than not. And the crown, what remained of it, was no longer worn by anyone. It is said that some kings die twice. Once when the breath leaves them, and once when they are no longer feared. Tomas the Pale did not die in bed. Nor in battle. Nor by blade, though many imagined it would end that way. His death was stranger. Quieter. So quiet, in fact, that some said it never happened at all. In the 20th year of his reign, the country knew a brief and tender peace. The old fear had loosened. Fields grew. Roads widened. Songs returned, not all at once, and never without caution, but they returned, like green after ash. The castle of Gradle, once suffocating in silence, now echoed softly with the sounds of people relearning how to live. Tomas permitted laughter. He permitted argument. He even permitted absence. "Let them leave," he told the council. "If they return, it means we are worth returning to." Some did. Many did not. He did not send soldiers to retrieve them. And still, something in him waned. Not visibly. His body remained, tall, thin, and pale as ever. His eyes still mirrored ice. But he had begun to withdraw from the world in a way that was not exile, but evaporation. He wandered the castle as if searching for something he had left behind. He sat beside the hearth without lighting it. He read old records, his own laws, his own edicts, and wept. Not because they were cruel, but because he had once believed them necessary. Then came the spring with no blossom. The trees bore leaves, but no fruit. Rivers ran, but no fish returned. Bees vanished. It was not famine, it was absence. Tomas felt it in his bones. A thinning of the world. A quiet so deep, it rang like a bell. He called the magician to him, older now, beard white, hands bent like old branches. Tomas asked, "When does a soul finish?" The magician answered, "When it finally sees itself and cannot bear the weight." Tomas nodded. "Then mine is near the end." There are two final accounts of the boy king. The first is from a monk, who claimed to have seen him walking barefoot through the chapel gardens before dawn. The frost had returned. He wore no cloak. He paused at a tree, touched the bark, and whispered, "I remember this." Then he stepped beyond the hedge, and did not return. The second account comes from a peasant girl named Ellen, years later. She said a pale man came to her village, quiet, watchful, offering no name. He helped repair the well. He slept in the barn. He smiled at her younger brother's songs. He stayed only 3 days. Then left before sunrise. On the beam where he slept, a single sentence was carved in the wood. "To live again I must forget I was ever watched." Tomas was never found. No tomb. No crown. No body. Only legend. Only a name whispered in the way wind moves through empty corridors. Some say he died alone, under a tree, smiling at birdsong he'd never learned to name. Others believe he lives still, not as a king, but as a man with dirt beneath his nails, unknown, unnoticed, free. And maybe that is the truest death a godchild could ask for. Not oblivion, but ordinariness. Final words. He was a boy who ruled before he could play. Who punished to protect himself from sound. Who grew without hunger, and therefore, without grace. But in the end, he tried. And perhaps that is all history can offer us. Not heroes. Not warnings. But attempts. Some beautiful. Some broken. All human.